Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with a dirty rag. The familiar hum of the space station's life support systems providing a constant backdrop to his work. The maintenance bay was his domain, filled with spare parts, half-assembled machinery, and the comforting smell of lubricants and metal shavings. After 15 years working on Deep Space Station Omega-7, he knew every pipe, every circuit, and every creaking joint in the massive structure. The station served as a neutral trading post on the outer rim of known space, where dozens of alien species came to barter, refuel, and conduct business far from the prying eyes of their respective governments. Marcus had seen them all: the insectoid Zephyrians with their clicking mandibles, the crystalline luminari who communicated through color changes, and the aquatic depths who required pressurized water suits to survive in the station's atmosphere. Today felt different, though. The usual chatter from the commercial docks was subdued, replaced by whispered conversations and nervous glances. Even the Vorthon traders, normally boisterous and loud, were conducting their business in hushed tones. Something had everyone on edge. Marcus was elbow-deep in a faulty atmospheric recycler when the first tremor shook the station. The vibration traveled through the deck plates and up into his bones, causing tools to rattle on their magnetic strips. He paused, listening. The hum of the life support systems wavered for just a moment before stabilizing. Probably just a transport docking, he muttered to himself, though the tremor felt different from the usual vibrations of ships connecting to the station's docking rings. The second tremor was stronger, lasting nearly 10 seconds. This time the lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance an alarm began to wail. Marcus pulled himself out of the machinery and reached for his communicator, but before he could activate it, the third tremor hit. This one was violent enough to knock him off his feet. The entire station groaned like a living thing in pain, and several of the overhead panels crashed to the deck. Emergency lighting bathed everything in an eerie red glow as the main power grid struggled to compensate for whatever was happening. Marcus scrambled to his feet and rushed to the nearest observation port. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the distance, barely visible against the star field, massive shapes moved with predatory grace. Ships. No, not ships. These things were organic living creatures the size of battlecruisers. Their hide was a deep, mottled green-black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Bony ridges ran along their backs, and their mouths gaped open to reveal rows of teeth longer than a man was tall. Space dragons. The stories were true. The creatures had been dismissed as myth by most of the galaxy's civilized species. Ancient legends spoke of vast predators that hunted between the stars, feeding on the energy of ships and stations. Most scientists had relegated such tales to the realm of folklore, explaining away occasional disappearances as equipment failures or raids by unknown hostile forces. But here they were, real and terrifyingly immediate. 3 of the massive beasts circled the station like sharks around a wounded seal. Their movements were graceful despite their enormous size, powered by some form of natural biological drive system that left no exhaust trail or energy signature. The station shuddered again as one of the creatures brushed against the outer hull. Marcus could hear the screech of metal being scored by claws the size of landing shuttles. Throughout the station, beings of a dozen different species were running, in panic, their universal translators filling the corridors with a babble of terrified voices. Marcus forced himself to think clearly. The station's defensive systems were minimal, a few point defense lasers designed to deal with debris, not massive living predators. The garrison of security officers carried small arms that would be less than useless against creatures this size. Most of the civilian ships docked at the station were unarmed traders and cargo haulers. He needed to get to the command center to find out if there was any plan to deal with this situation. But as he moved toward the corridor, the lights went out completely. Emergency power was failing, and the familiar hum of life support began to stutter and fade. In the darkness, Marcus heard something that chilled him more than the sight of the space dragons. It was a voice, transmitted through the station's communication system, but not from any of the usual channels. The voice was deep, resonant, and spoke in accented but clear standard galactic. Inhabitants of this station, the voice rumbled through every speaker on Omega-7. We are the Void Singers, children of the deep dark between worlds. We hunger, and your energy calls to us like a beacon in the endless night. A pause, filled only by the sound of metal groaning under incredible pressure. We do not wish to cause unnecessary destruction. Surrender your power cores, your fuel reserves, and your stored energy cells. Do this willingly, and we will allow your biological forms to continue their existence. Resist, and we will take what we need from your broken hulks. Marcus felt his way through the darkened corridor, using his intimate knowledge of the station's layout to navigate without light. Other beings stumbled past him in the darkness, some weeping, others praying to their various deities. The universal translator struggled to keep up with the mixture of languages and emotions. He reached the command center to find it in chaos. Administrator Kresh, a tall Altarian with blue-scaled skin, was frantically trying to coordinate with the few security officers still at their posts. The main display showed the tactical situation in stark detail. 3 massive biosignatures surrounding the station, each one easily 10 times the mass of the largest ship in the dock. "Sir," one of the security officers reported, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "The creatures have attached themselves to the outer hull. They're draining power directly from our conduits. At this rate, we'll lose life support in less than an hour." Administrator Kresh's scales had shifted to a pale, sickly color that Marcus recognized as the Altarian equivalent of going white with shock. "Options?" Kresh asked weakly. "We could try to overload the main reactor," suggested the security chief, a grizzled human named Rodriguez. "Take them with us." "And kill everyone on the station in the process," Kresh replied. "No, there has to be another way." Marcus stepped forward into the circle of emergency lighting around the command console. "Sir, I need to know, how much control do we still have over the station's systems?" Kresh looked at him with surprise. "Mechanic Williams, what are you doing here?" "I know this station better than anyone," Marcus said simply. "If there's a way to fight these things, it's going to involve the mechanical systems. So I need to know, what do we still have?" Rodriguez consulted his displays. "Emergency power is holding for now. We've got manual control over some of the environmental systems, basic communications, and about 30% of the structural integrity field generators." Marcus nodded slowly, his mind already working through possibilities. 15 years of maintaining every system on the station was about to pay off in ways he'd never imagined. The space dragons might be apex predators, but they'd never encountered human ingenuity applied to a problem of survival. "I need access to the central maintenance computer," Marcus said, "and I need it now." The central maintenance computer was located 3 levels down from the command center, in a section of the station that few beings ever visited. Marcus made his way through the darkened corridors with practiced ease, his hands trailing along the familiar walls and guide rails. Behind him, he could hear Administrator Kresh and Security Chief Rodriguez following, their breathing heavy with exertion and fear. The emergency lighting in the maintenance section was still functional, casting everything in a dim red glow that made shadows dance and twist like living things. Marcus placed his palm on the biometric scanner, and the reinforced door slid open with a soft hiss. The maintenance computer was a massive system, its banks of processors and memory cores humming with their own independent power supply. This was the brain that controlled everything from waste recycling to artificial gravity, and Marcus had spent countless hours learning its secrets. "What's your plan, Williams?" Rodriguez asked, his hand resting unconsciously on his sidearm. Marcus was already pulling up system diagnostics, his fingers flying over the holographic interface. "These creatures are feeding on our energy, right? They've tapped into our power grid and they're draining us dry." "That's what the sensors show," Kresh confirmed, his scales still pale with stress. "They've somehow interfaced with our hull-mounted power conduits. Then we give them exactly what they want," Marcus said, calling up the station's power distribution network. "But not the way they expect." The display showed the station's energy systems in real time. 3 distinct drain points appeared as red zones where the space dragons had attached themselves to the hull. Power was flowing out of the station at an alarming rate, but Marcus noticed something that the others had missed. "Look at this," he said, highlighting a section of the readout. "They're not just draining power randomly. They're being selective about what they take. They're avoiding the systems that would cause immediate catastrophic failure." Rodriguez frowned. "What do you mean?" They don't want to kill us outright, Marcus explained. If they destroyed life support or artificial gravity, they'd have a dead station floating in space. They want us alive so we can continue to generate power for them to feed on. They're planning to keep us as some kind of long-term energy source. The implications of this realization settled over the three of them like a cold blanket. These weren't mindless beasts acting on instinct. They were intelligent predators with a sophisticated understanding of how space stations functioned. So what do we do with that information? Kresh asked. Marcus was already diving deeper into the system architecture, pulling up subsystems that even he rarely accessed. We use their intelligence against them. They think they understand our technology, but they don't understand human engineering. Philosophy. He opened a file that most beings on the station didn't even know existed, the complete technical documentation for every human-designed component on Omega-7. The station had been built through a collaborative effort between multiple species, but nearly 40% of its critical systems bore the distinctive mark of human over-engineering. Humans have a reputation in the galaxy for building things that are unnecessarily complex and robust. Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of a professor giving a lecture. Other species design systems to operate at exactly the parameters they need. Humans design systems to operate under conditions far beyond what should ever be necessary. He pulled up the specifications for the station's fusion reactors. The Altarian design philosophy would have called for reactors capable of producing exactly 110% of the station's maximum power requirements. The human engineers had insisted on reactors capable of producing 300% of maximum requirements. Redundancy, Rodriguez said, beginning to understand. Exactly. And not just redundancy, hidden redundancy. The dragons think they've mapped our power grid, but they're only seeing the systems that are currently active. Marcus's fingers danced over the interface, bringing up a three-dimensional schematic of the station. Human paranoia means we built backup systems for our backup systems. Throughout the station, circuits that had never been activated began to come online. Power conduits that existed only on the original blueprints started carrying current for the first time since the station's construction. The dragons continued their feeding, unaware that the energy they were draining was being replaced by sources they hadn't detected. But Marcus wasn't finished. He dove into the environmental control systems, finding the subsections that controlled atmospheric processing, gravity generation, and structural integrity. Again, human over-engineering had provided capabilities far beyond what any rational species would consider necessary. The artificial gravity generators, he muttered, pulling up their control interface. Standard operating procedure is to maintain one standard gravity throughout the station. But the generators are capable of producing gravitational fields up to 15 times that strength. Kresh's scales began to shift toward a healthier blue as he realized what Marcus was suggesting. You want to increase the gravity? Not increase it, Marcus said with a grim smile. I want to manipulate it. The dragons are attached to our hull, feeding on our power, but gravity affects everything with mass, including them. He began to reprogram the gravity generators, creating a complex pattern of gravitational fields that would flow across the station's hull, like invisible waves. The dragons, pressed against the outer surface, would experience varying gravitational forces that would make maintaining their feeding positions extremely difficult. It's like trying to drink from a glass while someone is shaking the table, Rodriguez said, his expression showing the first sign of hope since the attack began. But Marcus wasn't finished with his preparations. He moved to the atmospheric control systems, specifically the sections that managed the station's heat distribution. The space between stars was cold beyond human comprehension, and maintaining livable temperatures required sophisticated thermal management. The dragons are cold-blooded, he said, making an educated guess based on their reptilian appearance. They've probably adapted to the cold of space, but that doesn't mean they're immune to temperature changes. He began rerouting the station's waste heat, concentrating it in the hull sections where the dragons were attached. At the same time, he prepared to vent atmosphere from strategic points on the station's exterior, creating localized temperature fluctuations that would make the dragons' feeding positions uncomfortable at best. The final component of his plan involved the station's structural integrity field generators. These were the systems that kept Omega-7 from tearing itself apart under the stress of rotation and docking operations. like everything else designed by humans. They were capable of far more than their normal operating parameters suggested. I'm going to modulate the structural fields to create resonance frequencies in the hull, Marcus explained as he worked. The dragons won't be able to maintain a stable connection to our power systems if the hull is vibrating at frequencies that interfere with their feeding apparatus. Kresh watched in amazement as Marcus orchestrated his multi-pronged assault on the space dragons. How did you know all of this would work? I didn't, Marcus admitted. But 15 years of maintaining systems that were built to survive the impossible has taught me that human engineers always leave themselves more options than they advertise. We're about to find out if our ancestors were as paranoid as their reputations suggest. He paused at the final control interface, his finger hovering over the activation command. This is going to get rough for everyone on the station. The gravity fluctuations, temperature changes, and structural vibrations are going to make things very uncomfortable, but it should be survivable for us and unbearable for them. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Do it. Marcus pressed the activation key, and throughout Omega-7, systems that had slumbered since construction roared to life. The battle between human engineering and cosmic predators was about to begin. The station convulsed like a living thing as Marcus's plan went into effect. The gravity generators began their complex dance, creating waves of gravitational force that rippled across Omega-7's hull. In the maintenance center, the three beings felt the deck beneath their feet become uncertain as their weight fluctuated between half-normal and twice-normal gravity. Through the structural framework of the station, they could hear the dragons responding to the unexpected assault. What had been the occasional scrape of claws against metal became a constant grinding roar as the massive creatures struggled to maintain their grip on the shifting, vibrating hull. It's working, Rodriguez said, checking his portable scanner. The power drain is becoming erratic. They're having trouble maintaining their connection to our systems. Marcus monitored the readouts with grim satisfaction. The thermal venting was creating hot and cold spots across the hull, while the structural field modulation was making the station's surface vibrate at frequencies that interfered with the dragon's ability to interface with the power conduits. But he knew this was only the first phase of his plan. They're intelligent, he reminded the others. They'll adapt to what we're doing. We need to stay ahead of them. As if summoned by his words, the voice of the Void Singers echoed through the station's communication system again. This time there was anger in the deep, resonant tones. Clever little builders, the voice growled. You think your tricks will save you? We have fed on the energy of 1,000 worlds. We have devoured the power of civilizations far older and more advanced than yours. The gravity fluctuations suddenly intensified as one of the dragons adapted its feeding technique, somehow compensating for the gravitational waves. Power began draining from the station at an even faster rate than before. They're learning, Kresh said, his scales shifting toward pale again. Marcus was already adjusting his strategy, diving deeper into the station's systems to find capabilities he'd never had reason to use. Then we teach them something they've never encountered before. He pulled up the station's manufacturing systems, the automated fabrication units that produced spare parts and emergency supplies. Most space stations had basic fabrication capabilities, but Omega-7's human-influenced design included manufacturing systems that bordered on the excessive. What are you doing now? Rodriguez asked, watching as Marcus began programming the fabrication units. Creating a surprise, Marcus replied, his hands moving rapidly over the interface. The dragons are feeding on our energy by interfacing directly with our power conduits. But what if those conduits suddenly started carrying more than just electricity? He began rerouting power through the manufacturing systems, using them to create a specific type of nanomachine, microscopic constructs designed for cleaning and maintenance. But Marcus was programming them for a very different purpose. Maintenance nanobots, he explained as he worked. Normally, we use them to clean corrosion and repair minor damage to internal systems. But they're designed to break down any substance that shouldn't be in our power conduits. The nanobots began flooding into the station's power grid, carried along by the electrical current itself. When they reached the points where the dragons were interfacing with the station's systems, they would encounter organic material that definitely didn't belong in electrical conduits. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Through the hull, they could hear one of the dragons emit a sound that was part roar and part scream of pain. The power drain from that section of the station dropped to zero as the creature pulled away from the hull. One down. Marcus said grimly. 2 to go. But the remaining dragons were already adapting to the nanobotic attack. The second creature altered its feeding method, somehow creating a barrier between its organic interface system and the station's conduits. The third dragon went further, actually severing the power lines it had been feeding from and tapping into backup systems that the nanobots hadn't reached yet. They're faster learners than I hoped, Marcus admitted, watching as his carefully planned defenses were systematically overcome. Time for the nuclear option. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Nuclear option? Not literally, Marcus clarified, though his expression was grim. But close. Every space station has emergency protocols for catastrophic system failures. Usually these are designed to save lives when everything else has gone wrong. He brought up a control interface that was secured behind multiple safety locks and authorization protocols. The screen displayed a single ominous message. Emergency core ejection system. Authorized personnel only. Kresh's scales went completely white. You want to eject the fusion reactors? Not eject them, Marcus said, his fingers working to bypass the safety protocols with his maintenance authorization codes. I want to make the dragons think I'm going to eject them. The fusion reactors that powered Omega-7 were massive, heavily shielded constructs located at the station's core. In the event of a catastrophic containment failure, they could be ejected into space to prevent them from destroying the station. The ejection system was designed to activate automatically if reactor containment dropped below critical levels. The dragons are smart, Marcus explained as he worked. They know that if we lose our main power source, the station dies and they lose their long-term food supply. So when they detect that we're preparing to eject the reactors, they'll do everything they can to stop us. He began initiating the ejection sequence, but stopped just short of the point of no return. Throughout the station, warning klaxons began to wail as the automated systems detected the reactor preparation sequence. Emergency lighting shifted to the angry amber that indicated imminent catastrophic failure. The response from the dragons was immediate, and exactly what Marcus had hoped for. All 3 creatures abandoned their feeding positions and converged on the station's core, trying to use their bulk to physically prevent the reactors from ejecting. Their claws scrabbled against the armored hull sections, looking for ways to interfere with the ejection mechanisms. Now, Marcus said, activating the final phase of his plan. Instead of ejecting the reactors, he triggered every defensive system the station possessed simultaneously. The point defense lasers, designed to destroy small debris, might be useless against the dragon's armored hide, but they could create a brilliant light show that would disorient creatures adapted to the darkness of space. The station's navigation strobes, emergency beacons, and communication arrays all activated at maximum power, turning Omega-7 into a blazing beacon visible from several light-years away. At the same time, Marcus activated the station's emergency maneuvering thrusters. These were tiny chemical rockets designed to make small adjustments to the station's position, but when fired all at once, they created a chaotic series of acceleration vectors that threw everything on the station into confusion. The dragons, pressed against the hull and expecting the reactors to eject, suddenly found themselves dealing with a station that was spinning, flashing and bucking like an angry horse. The combination of sensory overload and unpredictable motion proved too much for creatures that relied on stealth and precision to feed. One by one, the massive predators released their grip on the station and fell back into the darkness of space. Through the observation ports, Marcus could see them regrouping at a safe distance, their forms barely visible against the star field. Are they leaving? Rodriguez asked hopefully. The answer came in the form of the lead dragon's voice, transmitted once again through the station's communication system. But this time the tone was different, respectful rather than threatening. Builders of the station, the voice said, you have proven yourselves worthy of respect. We came expecting easy prey, but found instead opponents of cunning and determination. A pause, during which Marcus held his breath. We withdraw our claim on your energy and we offer a different arrangement. There are others in this region of space, pirates and raiders who prey upon honest traders. We will hunt them instead. If you will share the techniques you use to resist our feeding, we would learn from your engineering wisdom. Marcus looked at his companions, seeing his own amazement reflected in their faces. The space dragons weren't just intelligent. They were capable of recognizing and respecting superior tactics when they encountered them. What do you think? Kresh asked quietly. Marcus considered the offer, trading technical knowledge to turn cosmic predators into allies against common enemies. It was either the most brilliant diplomatic coup in galactic history, or the most dangerous mistake any species had ever made. I think, he said slowly, we're about to find out just how far human engineering principles can take us. 3 days after the dragon encounter, Omega-7 had settled into an uneasy routine. The massive creatures had withdrawn to the edge of the system, maintaining a respectful distance while waiting for humanity's response to their unprecedented offer. Throughout the station, beings of dozens of species whispered about the events they had witnessed, and many had changed their travel plans to remain and see what would happen. Next, Marcus found himself thrust into a role he had never wanted or expected: chief negotiator between the galactic community and legendary space predators. Administrator Kresh had officially appointed him as the station's technical liaison, recognizing that the dragons were more interested in speaking with the human who had outmaneuvered them than with traditional diplomats. The command center had been converted into a makeshift conference room, with representatives from a dozen major spacefaring civilizations participating via quantum communication links. The discussion had been ongoing for hours, with most species representatives expressing varying degrees of horror at the idea of allying with the Void Singers. "You're talking about making deals with cosmic monsters," protested Ambassador Thexhai, a crystalline luminary whose color patterns flickered with agitation. "These creatures have terrorized space lanes for millennia. They've destroyed entire colonies." "According to legend and unverified reports," Marcus replied calmly. "But now we have the opportunity to hear their side of the story directly. Maybe there's more to their behavior than simple predation." The Vorthan trade representative, a thick-bodied being with 4 arms and an elaborate series of breathing apparatus, gestured dismissively. "Humans always think they can negotiate with anything. Your species would try to make peace with a supernova if it would listen. And that's exactly why they succeeded where the rest of us failed," interjected Commander Zefka, a military representative from the Altarian Defense Force. "Human tactical thinking is fundamentally different from ours. They don't just respond to threats, they try to understand them." Marcus appreciated the support, but he could understand the other species' concerns. The dragon's offer was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. No one knew what sharing human engineering techniques with cosmic predators might lead to in the long term. "The question," said Dr. Yanara, a research specialist from the Aquatic Depths Consortium, "is whether we can trust them to honor any agreement. These are creatures that feed on the energy of space stations. How do we know they won't simply use our knowledge to become more efficient predators?" Before Marcus could respond, the communication system crackled to life with the now familiar voice of the Void Singer leader. The dragons had been monitoring their discussions, as had been agreed upon as part of the ongoing negotiations. "Dr. Yanara raises a valid concern," the dragon said, its voice carrying an undertone of what might have been amusement. "Perhaps it would help if we shared our perspective on these matters." The display screen flickered and resolved into an image that made several of the alien representatives step back in alarm. The dragon's head filled the screen, scales the size of dinner plates gleaming in the reflected light of distant stars. Its eyes were intelligent and ancient, holding depths that spoke of millennia of experience. "I am Corvuseth, eldest of this hunting pack and speaker for our kind in this region of space. We have listened to your debate with great interest, and we believe there are misunderstandings that should be corrected." The dragon's image shifted slightly, and Marcus realized that Corvuseth was deliberately angling his head to appear less threatening. It was a subtle gesture that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of interspecies communication. "You speak of us as monsters, as cosmic terrors that prey upon innocent travelers. There is truth in this, but it is not the complete truth. We are predators, yes, but we are not indiscriminate killers. We hunt to survive, just as your own species do." Ambassador Thexhai's color patterns shifted to angry red. "You've destroyed entire colonies. We have destroyed colonies that were built in our traditional hunting grounds without permission or negotiation," Corvuseth replied matter-of-factly. "Your species established settlements wherever you choose, often without considering that others might already have claims to those regions of space. When we attempt to communicate, we are usually met with weapons fire and called monsters." The dragon's explanation sent a ripple of uncomfortable realization through the assembled representatives. Marcus could see that many of them were beginning to understand that the galaxy's expansion might have been less peaceful than their history books suggested. You're saying that some of these attacks were territorial disputes? Marcus asked. Most of them, Corvuseth confirmed. We are not mindless beasts. We have culture, history, and laws of our own. We claim hunting territories that span light years, and we defend them when necessary. But we have never sought to exterminate entire species or destroy civilizations for the pleasure of destruction. Dr. Yanara activated her translation device. Her aquatic speech patterns converted to standard galactic. If this is true, why haven't you attempted formal diplomatic contact before now? Corvuseth's expression, if a dragon's face could be said to have expressions, became something that might have been rueful. Because most species react to our presence with immediate hostility. Your weapons cannot significantly harm us, but they demonstrate clear intent. How does one negotiate with beings who attack first and ask questions never? The logic was uncomfortable but undeniable. Marcus thought about his own first reaction to seeing the dragons, terror and an immediate assumption of hostile intent. Only the desperate circumstances had forced him to think tactically rather than emotionally. What changed? Marcus asked. Why are you willing to negotiate now? Because for the first time in many centuries we encountered a species that fought us using intelligence, rather than weapons, Corvuseth replied. Your defense of this station demonstrated that humans are capable of thinking in ways that we had not anticipated. This suggests that your species might be capable of the kind of long-term strategic thinking necessary for meaningful cooperation. Commander Zefka leaned forward. What kind of cooperation are you proposing? The dragon's image pulled back slightly, revealing more of his massive form. The regions of space that we hunt are also favored by pirates, raiders, and other hostile forces. These beings prey upon merchant vessels and civilian settlements, often in ways far more destructive than our own feeding practices. We propose a partnership. We will hunt these criminals in exchange for exclusive access to certain energy sources and the sharing of specific technologies. What technologies? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The techniques you use to resist our feeding, Corvuseth said. Not weapons, but methods of engineering and system design that demonstrate principles we have not encountered before. In particular, we are interested in your concepts of redundancy and over-engineering. These approaches to building and maintaining complex systems could be adapted to our own biological processes. The implications of this request began to sink in around the room. The dragons weren't just asking for weapons or defensive technologies. They wanted to understand human engineering philosophy and apply it to improving their own natural abilities. Sure, want to become better predators, Ambassador Thexai said accusingly. We want to become more efficient survivors, Corvuseth corrected. The galaxy is changing. New species are expanding into regions that have been wild space for millions of years. Old hunting grounds are becoming settled systems. We must adapt or face extinction. Marcus realized that they were witnessing something unprecedented. In galactic history, a species that had remained unchanged for millennia was now actively seeking to evolve and improve. The dragons weren't just offering an alliance. They were asking for help in transforming themselves for a changing universe. There's something else, Corvuseth continued. We have knowledge that your species might find valuable. We have traveled between the stars for far longer than any of your civilizations have existed. We know of ancient ruins, abandoned technologies, and regions of space that contain resources beyond your current understanding. The offer hung in the air like a challenge. The dragons were proposing a true exchange, human engineering knowledge for draconic cosmic wisdom. It was an opportunity that might never come again, but it was also a risk that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. Marcus looked around the room at the assembled representatives, seeing fear, greed, curiosity, and calculation in equal measure. The decision they made in the next few hours would echo through history for generations to come. We need time to consider your proposal, he said finally. Corvuseth's massive head nodded slowly. Time we will give you, but know that others of our kind are watching these negotiations with great interest. The choice you make here will determine whether humanity is seen as a potential ally or simply another prey species to be avoided. The debate continued for 18 hours straight, with representatives taking turns to voice their concerns, fears, and hopes about the Dragon Alliance. Marcus found himself fielding technical questions about human engineering, principles while simultaneously trying to address the political and strategic implications of the proposed partnership. The Zephyrian hive mind representative spoke through their insectoid ambassador, clicking mandibles translating into rapid standard galactic. Our collective consciousness has run probability analyses on this alliance. The potential benefits are significant, but the risks include scenarios where enhanced dragons could threaten all spacefaring civilization. With respect, Marcus replied. Those same probability analyses probably showed that 3 dragons could easily destroy this station and kill everyone aboard. Human unpredictability seems to be a factor that your calculations have trouble accounting for. Dr. Yanara raised a webbed appendage from her aquatic suit. The human has a point. Our own predictive models failed to account for the defense strategies employed during the initial encounter. Perhaps we should consider that our assumptions about dragon behavior might be equally flawed. The discussion was interrupted by an urgent communication from the station's sensor array. Security Chief Rodriguez's voice crackled through the speakers with barely controlled tension. Command Center, we have a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple ships approaching the system at high velocity. Configuration unknown, but their trajectory suggests hostile intent. Marcus felt his stomach clench. How many ships? 17 vessels, ranging from frigate to battlecruiser class. They'll reach the system perimeter in approximately 4 hours. Ambassador Thexhigh's color patterns shifted to alarmed orange. Pirates? Unknown, Rodriguez replied. But their energy signatures don't match any registered military or commercial vessels. And they're broadcasting on frequencies typically used by raider organizations. The timing couldn't have been worse. Here they were, debating whether to trust the dragons when a very real and immediate threat was approaching the station. Marcus looked at the assembled representatives, seeing the same thought reflected in their faces. This could be exactly the kind of test that would determine the future of human-dragon relations. Corvuseth, Marcus said, addressing the dragon directly through the communication link. Are you monitoring our sensor readings? We are, the dragon replied, his voice carrying a note of interest. The approaching vessels are indeed raiders, specifically the Crimson Nebula pirates. We have encountered them before. They are particularly brutal, even by pirate standards. Commander Zefka activated his military scanner, cross-referencing the approaching ships with known pirate databases. Confirmed. The Crimson Nebula pirates have been responsible for 14 major attacks in this sector over the past 2 years. They don't just steal cargo. They take slaves and destroy infrastructure. The revelation sent a chill through the room. The Crimson Nebula pirates were notorious for their cruelty, often spacing entire crews just for entertainment. If they reached Omega-7, the consequences would be catastrophic for everyone aboard. Station defenses? Marcus asked Rodriguez. Minimal, came the grim reply. Point defense lasers and a handful of security personnel with small arms. Against 17 warships, we might last 15 minutes. The civilian vessels in dock? 3 armed merchant cruisers, 2 of which are currently undergoing engine maintenance. The third could probably take on 1 pirate frigate before being overwhelmed. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Thousands of beings lived and worked on Omega-7, representing dozens of species and cultures. In 4 hours, they would all be at the mercy of pirates who showed no mercy to anyone. Corvuseth, he said slowly, how long would it take your pack to intercept those ships? Less than 2 of your hours, the dragon replied immediately. But we require an answer to our alliance proposal before we act. We will not risk ourselves for beings who have not committed to partnership. The demand sparked immediate outrage among several representatives. The Vorthan trade delegate's breathing apparatus wheezed with indignation. You would let innocents die over a political negotiation? You would let innocents die rather than make a difficult decision, Corvuseth replied calmly. We have waited 3 days for your answer. The approaching threat merely provides context for your choice. Marcus realized that this was more than just unfortunate timing. It was a test. The dragons had probably known about the approaching pirates long before the station's sensors detected them. They were forcing the galactic community to make a decision under pressure, to show whether they could move beyond debate to action when lives were at stake. He's right, Marcus said, surprising everyone in the room. We've been arguing about theoretical risks and hypothetical scenarios for 3 days. Now we have a real situation that requires an immediate decision. Do we want the dragons' help or not? Dr. Yanara's aquatic suit bubbled as she spoke rapidly in her native language. then switched to Standard Galactic. The Depths Consortium agrees to a limited trial alliance. The immediate threat outweighs our long-term concerns. Commander Zefka nodded grimly. The Altarian Defense Force concurs. Lives take precedence over politics. One by one, the other representatives voiced their agreement, some reluctantly, others with obvious relief at having the decision forced upon them. Only Ambassador Thexahai held out, his crystalline form pulsing with conflicted color patterns. The Luminary Republic cannot sanction an alliance with cosmic predators, he said finally. We abstain from this decision. Abstention noted, Marcus said formally, then turned to the dragon on the screen. Corvuseth, you have a majority agreement for a trial alliance. What do you need from us? The dragon's massive head tilted in what might have been satisfaction. First, we need detailed technical specifications for the defensive systems you used against us. Second, we need real-time access to your sensor network to coordinate our attack on the pirates. Third, we need formal recognition that this alliance represents a precedent for future cooperation. Marcus looked around the room, seeing nods from most of the representatives. Agreed on all points. How quickly can you engage the pirates? We are already moving to intercept, Corvuseth replied. But we want your technician, Marcus Williams, to observe our hunting methods. It will help him understand how to adapt human engineering principles to our biological systems. The request caught Marcus off guard. You want me to come with you? Not physically, Corvuseth clarified. We will establish a quantum communication link that will allow you to experience our hunt through our senses. You will see how we fight, how we feed, and how we survive in the void between stars. It was an unprecedented offer, the chance to experience space combat from the perspective of a cosmic predator. Marcus realized that accepting would mean crossing a line from which there might be no return. He would become the first human to truly understand the dragons, but also the first human to be fundamentally changed by that understanding. The link is safe? He asked. As safe as any quantum entanglement can be, Corvuseth replied. But you should know that sharing consciousness with a void singer leaves permanent changes. You will never again see the universe quite the same way. Marcus thought about the thousands of beings on the station, about the approaching pirates, and about the choice that would define humanity's relationship with the cosmos for generations to come. Do it, he said. The last thing Marcus saw, before the quantum link activated, was Administrator Kresh's shocked expression. Then his consciousness exploded outward into the cold darkness between stars, and he became something more and less than human. Marcus's consciousness expanded beyond anything he had ever imagined possible. One moment he was standing in the command center of Omega-7, and the next he was flowing through space itself, his awareness distributed across impossible distances. He could feel the quantum vacuum fluctuations against his skin, sense the gravitational currents between stars, and perceive electromagnetic radiation as a symphony of colors that had no names in any human language. He was still Marcus Williams, human mechanic, but he was also something else now. A passenger in the cosmic consciousness of Corvuseth, eldest of the Void Singers. Through the dragon's senses, Marcus experienced space as no human ever had before. The cold didn't register as temperature, but as a fundamental quality of existence, like the color blue or the sound of music. The vacuum wasn't empty, but filled with currents and eddies of energy that the dragons rode like cosmic winds. And the approaching pirate fleet wasn't just a collection of ships, but a pattern of heat and metal and violent intention painted across the darkness. Can you perceive them? Corvuseth's thoughts merged with his own, not as words but as direct understanding. Marcus tried to respond and discovered that his thoughts had taken on new dimensions. Instead of linear human reasoning, he found himself thinking in three-dimensional patterns that incorporated past, present, and probability into a single gestalt awareness. I can see them, he managed, though seeing was inadequate to describe the sensory experience. The pirate ships appeared as harsh geometric shapes surrounded by clouds of waste heat and electromagnetic noise. Their hulls were scarred with battle damage, and their energy signatures spoke of weapons charged and ready for violence. Observe, Corvuseth instructed, and Marcus felt the dragon's consciousness shift into what could only be described as hunting mode. The transformation was extraordinary. Corvuseth's already formidable awareness expanded even further, encompassing not just the immediate space around the pirates, but the entire system. Marcus could sense the other two dragons in the hunting pack, their minds linked in a network of shared perception that created a tactical awareness no single consciousness could achieve. The dragons moved through space with a grace that defied their massive size. They didn't travel in straight lines but followed complex curved paths that took advantage of gravitational fields, magnetic anomalies, and even the solar wind from the system's star. Marcus realized that they weren't just moving through space, they were dancing with it, using the fundamental forces of the universe as partners in their approach. Your species builds machines to overcome the environment, Corvuseth's thoughts explained as they closed the distance to the pirates. We evolved to become one with it. This is why your engineering principles intrigue us so greatly. The first contact with the pirate fleet was almost anticlimactic. The lead dragon, a creature called Valthis, simply materialized next to the largest pirate vessel and began to feed. Marcus watched in fascination as the dragon's biological systems interfaced with the ship's power grid, draining energy so rapidly that the vessel's lights flickered and died within seconds. The pirates' response was immediate and predictable. Weapons fire erupted from every ship in the fleet, energy beams and projectiles filling space with deadly light. But the dragons were no longer where the weapons were aimed. They had scattered into complex evasive patterns, using their quantum-linked awareness to stay ahead of targeting computers that couldn't track targets moving in 4 dimensions. They're using human tactics, Marcus realized with amazement. We learned from your defense of the station, Corvuseth confirmed. Unpredictability, misdirection, and using the enemy's assumptions against them. Very effective principles. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the recorded history of space combat. The dragons didn't engage the pirates in traditional ship-to-ship fighting, but instead used tactics that turned the pirate fleet's strengths against itself. When the pirates concentrated their fire on one dragon, the others would appear behind different ships and begin draining their power. When the pirates spread out to avoid energy drain, the dragons would use gravitational manipulation to cause accidental collisions between vessels. Marcus watched as Corvuseth approached a pirate cruiser that was firing frantically in all directions. Instead of attacking the ship directly, the dragon began to sing, a deep harmonic vibration that resonated through the quantum foam itself. The song interfered with the cruiser's computer systems, causing targeting errors and navigation failures that sent the ship spinning helplessly through space. Quantum harmonics, Corvuseth explained. We discovered this ability only recently, after studying the resonance frequencies you used in your station's defense. The adaptation of human defensive principles to draconic abilities was remarkable to witness. The dragons had taken concepts like redundancy, misdirection, and systemic interference and translated them into biological capabilities that no human engineer had ever imagined. The third dragon, Zephmala, demonstrated another adapted technique. She used her natural electromagnetic manipulation abilities to create false sensor readings that made the pirates think there were dozens of dragons instead of just 3. The confused pirates began firing on phantom targets, wasting ammunition and revealing their positions to the real attackers. But it was the final phase of the battle that truly demonstrated how far the dragons had progressed in adapting human concepts. Instead of simply destroying the pirate fleet, they began to systematically disable each ship while leaving the crews alive. They drained power systems without touching life support, disabled weapons without damaging hull integrity, and used precise gravitational fields to capture escape pods before they could be launched. You're taking prisoners, Marcus observed. Another human concept, Corvuseth replied. We realize that destroying enemies provides only temporary satisfaction. Capturing them and forcing them to make restitution for their crimes provides long-term benefit to the galactic community. Within an hour, the entire Crimson Nebula pirate fleet was drifting helplessly in space, their crews alive but completely at the mercy of the dragons. It was a victory achieved not through superior firepower, but through superior adaptation and intelligence. As the quantum link began to fade, Marcus found himself back in his own body in the command center of Omega-7. But he was forever changed by what he had experienced. He could still sense the quantum fluctuations around him, still feel the gravitational currents flowing through the system. Part of him would always remain connected to the cosmic consciousness of the Void Singers. Status report, he managed to say, his voice hoarse from the psychic strain of the link. All pirate vessels disabled and secured, Rodriguez reported. his expression showing a mixture of relief and awe. No casualties among the Dragon Pack. The pirates are being held for transfer to proper authorities. Administrator Kresh approached Marcus with obvious concern. Are you all right? You've been standing motionless for over an hour. Marcus nodded slowly, still adjusting to the limitations of single-perspective consciousness. I'm fine. Different but fine, and I understand now what we're dealing with. He turned to address the assembled representatives, many of whom were staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to fear. The dragons aren't just asking for an alliance. They're asking for the chance to evolve. They want to transform themselves from cosmic predators into cosmic guardians, and after what I've just experienced, I believe they can do it. Ambassador Thexai's color pattern shifted to skeptical purple. And you support this transformation? Marcus considered the question carefully. He thought about the elegance of draconic movement through space, the sophistication of their quantum-linked consciousness, and the potential for cooperation between species that had never before been possible. I support it, he said finally, because I've seen what they're capable of becoming, and because I think humanity has as much to learn from them as they do from us. The alliance between humanity and the Void Singers was formally ratified 6 hours later, marking the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization. But Marcus knew that the real transformation had already begun, in the quantum entanglement between human engineering and draconic evolution that would reshape both species forever. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station, watching as human engineers worked alongside Void Singer hatchlings to install the latest generation of quantum biological hybrid systems. The station was a marvel of cooperative engineering, combining human technological principles with draconic biological adaptation in ways that neither species could have achieved alone. The changes in both civilizations had been remarkable and rapid. Human ships now incorporated biological components that could adapt to damage and self-repair, while dragons had developed technological augmentations that enhanced their natural abilities. The combination had produced vessels capable of feats that seemed like magic to the older generation of spacers. Marcus himself had become something unique and galactic. Civilization, the first human-dragon interface specialist. The quantum entanglement he had experienced during the pirate battle had left him permanently changed, able to perceive space-time in ways that normal humans couldn't. He could sense gravitational currents, feel electromagnetic fluctuations, and even detect quantum probability fluctuations with remarkable accuracy. The transformation hadn't been without its costs. He sometimes found himself thinking in the multidimensional patterns of draconic consciousness, which made normal human conversation difficult. He needed less sleep, but required periods of deep meditation to process the constant flow of quantum information his enhanced senses provided. Most challenging of all, he was slowly becoming more dragon than human in his fundamental nature. But the benefits to galactic civilization had been extraordinary. The alliance between humans and dragons had created a new form of space exploration and defense that was revolutionizing how the galaxy understood itself. Piracy had virtually disappeared from their region of space, not because the dragons destroyed every pirate ship they encountered, but because they had developed rehabilitation programs that transformed raiders into productive members of society. Marcus, came a familiar voice from behind him. He turned to see Administrator Kresh approaching, his scales now showing the healthy blue-green that indicated contentment and prosperity. The council session is about to begin. The Galactic Cooperation Council had been established to manage the growing alliance between traditional spacefaring civilizations and the Void Singers. What had started as an emergency partnership had evolved into something that was reshaping galactic politics at the fundamental level. They walked together to the council chamber, a spherical room designed to accommodate beings of vastly different sizes and environmental requirements. Human representatives sat in traditional chairs, while aquatic delegates remained in their water-filled suits, and the Void Singer representative appeared via quantum projection as a miniature version of Corvuseth. The first item on today's agenda, announced Council Speaker Yalara, a diplomatic veteran from the Centauran Federation, is the petition from the Hegemony Systems to join the Human-Dragon Alliance. Marcus wasn't surprised. The Hegemony had been one of the most vocal opponents of the alliance when it was first formed, but the economic and security benefits had proven impossible to ignore. Trade routes protected by dragons were completely safe from piracy, and the technological advances from human-dragon cooperation were creating new industries and opportunities throughout the galaxy. The hegemony delegation is recognized, Speaker Yalara announced. The hegemony representative, a tall humanoid with distinctive ridged features, stood to address the council. Honored delegates, the hegemony formally requests admission to the Alliance framework. We offer our industrial capacity and our expertise in quantum metallurgy in exchange for protection rights and technology sharing agreements. It was the same request that 17 other civilizations had made in the past 6 months. The Alliance had become so successful that every major power in the galaxy wanted to join, despite their initial fears about cooperating with cosmic predators. The petition will be considered, Speaker Yalara replied formally. Corvuseth, do the Void Singers have any objections to hegemony membership? The dragon's miniature projection tilted its massive head thoughtfully. The hegemony has a history of aggressive expansion and environmental destruction. However, they have also shown genuine effort to reform their practices in recent months. We are willing to accept them on a probationary basis, with full membership contingent on their adherence to Alliance environmental standards. Marcus smiled at the irony. The cosmic predators were now setting environmental standards for galactic civilization. The dragons had become the galaxy's most effective conservationists, using their unique perspective to identify ecological problems that traditional science had missed. The next item, Speaker Yalara continued, is the report on the ancient archive expedition. This was what Marcus had been waiting for. 3 months ago, Corvuseth had revealed the location of an ancient facility that predated any known civilization. The dragons had discovered it millennia ago, but had never been able to access it due to technological barriers. Human engineering expertise had finally made exploration possible. Dr. Chen Wei, the expedition's lead scientist, activated a holographic display showing the exterior of the archive. It was a massive structure, clearly artificial but built using principles that no current civilization understood. The hull was composed of some kind of metamaterial that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The archive contains technological and historical data spanning approximately 50 million years, Dr. Chen reported. We've barely scratched the surface, but what we've found so far suggests that the galaxy has been through multiple cycles of civilization, each one more advanced than the last. The implications were staggering. If the archive's data was accurate, then the current galactic civilizations were relative newcomers, and there had been species far more advanced than anything currently existing. Most significantly, Dr. Chen continued, we found evidence that the Void Singers are not native to this galaxy. They arrived here approximately 2 million years ago, refugees from some cosmic catastrophe that destroyed their original home. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Through his quantum link with Corvuseth, he could sense the dragon's emotional response to this revelation, a deep sadness mixed with ancient fear. The archive contains detailed records of what destroyed the dragon's home galaxy, Dr. Chen said, her voice becoming grave. An entity or force called the Consuming Dark, something that devours entire galactic clusters, leaving nothing but empty space behind. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If such a force existed, and if it was still active, then the entire known galaxy could be at risk. How much time do we have? Commander Zefka asked, his military training focusing on the tactical implications. According to the archive data, the Consuming Dark moves slowly on cosmic scales, Dr. Chen replied. It destroyed the dragon's home galaxy approximately 2 million years ago, and it appears to be methodically working its way through this galactic cluster. Based on its observed pattern, it should reach our galaxy in approximately 50,000 years. 50,000 years, an impossible span of time for most species to comprehend, but Marcus could sense through his link with Corvuseth that the dragons viewed it as barely enough time to prepare. The archive contains defensive technologies, Dr. Chen continued. Weapons and strategies developed by previous civilizations to fight the Consuming Dark. None of them were ultimately successful, but each one learned something that brings us closer to a solution. Marcus realized that this was why the dragons had been so interested in human engineering principles. They weren't just trying to evolve as predators. They were preparing for a war that would determine the survival of all life in the galaxy. The alliance takes on new significance, Corvuseth said, his quantum projection flickering with emotion.
Humans excel at finding solutions to impossible problems.
Dragons excel at long-term planning and cosmic-scale thinking. Together we might be able to accomplish what no previous civilization could achieve alone. As the council session continued, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them all to this point. It had started with a simple maintenance problem on a remote space station, and had evolved into a partnership that might determine the fate of the galaxy itself. He looked around the chamber at the representatives of dozens of species, all of them now united in a cause larger than any of their individual civilizations. The human mechanic who had once worried about fixing atmospheric recyclers was now part of a galactic alliance preparing for a war against cosmic destruction. The irony wasn't lost on him. The dragons had come to Omega-7 looking for a simple meal, and instead they had found partners in the greatest engineering challenge the universe had ever presented. Sometimes the most important discoveries began with the smallest requests. "Just a bit of food, sir," Marcus murmured to himself, remembering the dragon's first words. Who would have thought it would lead to this? Through his quantum link, he felt Corvuseth's amusement at the human tendency to find profound meaning in simple beginnings. But there was also gratitude there and hope. For the first time in 2 million years, the dragons believed they might have found a way to stop the consuming dark.